know, we have this International Center for Chinese Philosophy at Suzhou University, and we have a lecture series, and today is our 16th session, and we are very honored to have Brook Ziporyn, Professor Ziporyn. Ziporyn or Ziporyn? You're always wondering.
Ziporyn.
Ziporyn, sorry. Ziporyn. Yeah, I call you Brook. Yeah, if you like.
That's good.
Yeah. So we have Brook with us, and we are very happy and glad to have him. Very honored. And yeah, Brook Ziporyn is a specialist in Tiantai thought originally. So it is I think the perception of most people that he has been working in Buddhism and what he calls a neo-Tiantai philosophy. So he's now teaching at Divinity School at the University of Chicago and has written a number of books, but as you will realize very quickly, his area of expertise is not just merely Buddhism or Tiantai Buddhism, but it's much broader, Chinese philosophy in general, and also Western philosophy, in particular German idealism. So, which this combination I find very attractive and very fascinating, of course. So, you will see he's doing something very interesting and very exciting, I think, by on the one hand entering the Buddhist mind, and on the other hand by trying to draw out comparisons or kind of similarities between Buddhist thought on the one hand and then Western thought, Hegel, German idealism, but also Spinoza and many other thinkers. So his books are numerous. Just to give you one example of which I found a fascinating book, one of his earliest books is called Being an Ambiguity, I think published 10 years ago. Being an Ambiguity, Philosophical Experiments with Tiantai Buddhism, which I just discovered recently, and I found it really very good and very eye-opening in many ways, because we always have this feeling that when we read Buddhist texts, it's very difficult to enter them, and they are very speculative and, on the other hand, not very accessible to us Westerners. But then by reading Brook's book, and then you really discover that, like in this movie Being John Malkovich, it's possible to enter the Buddhist mind and to really follow these guys. They are where they are going, and his writing style, Brook's writing style is not very philological. He's a good philologist, but he has a very strong philosophical nature or an interest there. So he is not only writing about Tiantai philosophy, but he's also at the same time writing about Hegel and Fichte and about Sartre and about Thelonious Monk, the piano player, and Bill Evans, and about the monkness and evensness of a piano becoming part, as he calls it, of Monk's body, of the coherence of monkness, saturated by that quality such that seeing and hearing this piano is then seeing and hearing Monk. So just to quote one very, I think, characteristic sentence of Brook. And often his books read like detective novels, I think, and in particular his reconstruction of this Buddhist ontology is fascinating. And this is his newest book on oneness and difference. If I am not wrong, on it's on the very complex Chinese notion of Li. So Li, the Dao Li, the Li, which has often been translated as principle, but which, according to Brook, is a much more complex notion. And in these 2 volumes, he gives us more or less a Begriffsgeschichte of this notion of Li. And then he has another book on Guoxiang, the Penumbra Unbound, again with very long digressions on German idealism and on the problem of determinism and free will, also fascinating read. And on another book on evil and or as the good, on omnicentrism, intersubjectivity and the value paradox in Tiantai Buddhist thought, which he published with Harvard University Press in the year 2000. In the year 2000. And just to mention another one, he has also published a new translation of the Zhuangzi, the essential core Zhuangzi, including traditional commentaries with Hacke. So his interests are very broad, and he is also a fascinating speaker. So I'm looking forward to listening to you today. And we're very honored to have you here. And 就是简单来说，我刚刚简单介绍了这个用英文介绍这个 Brook 任伯克教授，然后我们真的很荣幸在这里邀请到他，因为他就是现在任教芝加哥大学的神学院啊。那我像他这个，我常常开玩笑的说，他是在西方好像唯一的真的看得懂佛经的一个学者，对，就是因为这个佛经，我们常常会觉得啊，都至少西方人会常常觉得好像很难进入这个佛法或者 像天台宗、华严宗他们所开山的这样的一个世界观啊，就是不容易进入啊，不容易理解。但是这个任教授非常成功的啊，用现代的话来说明啊、解释啊这些佛经，然后佛教哲学啊是他的专长啊。他写了很多书，我刚刚列出这些书名啊。除了佛教以外，他的研究啊专长也是道家啊多项啊庄子注啊以及庄子的文本啊，还有写一个最近有出了一本新的译本。然后他今天会讲一个也就我觉得非常有趣的一个题目The importance of being godless, the unintended universe and China's spiritual legacy. So I'm just 就是 maybe 我们就鼓掌一下，对，欢迎他。我就不多说了啊，请你开始。
Okay. So I think I'm going to use English and Chinese a little bit. And thank you, Kai. That was a magnificent introduction. Sort of puts me on the back foot a little bit. So this paper is part of a project. It's really very broadly construed, an attempt to try to pinpoint something. If you've seen the paper, which I'm trying to define as godless religiousness as a distinctive characteristic of at least a lot of mainstream classical Chinese thinking. And of course, both those terms are very contentious. When I was thinking about talking about this today, I was thinking, I'm using this term godless with a hyphen, and avoiding the term atheism, although it could just as well, I could use that term, but it would maybe lead to some misunderstandings. If you look at the paper, you know that what I mean by godlessness is very, very specific here. And I was thinking to translate this into the sort of true fabian of this project into Chinese. I wouldn't use Wu Shen Lun, because Wu Shen Lun would suggest the absence of any gods, any non-empirical spiritual forces or anything like that. Really, I'm talking about, as the title of this talk suggests, the universe itself as inadvertent, that is, as not the result of any intention and as not being causally beholden to any purpose. So 我原来在想，如果要用中文翻译这个概念，你要说什么？你要说无神论也不太恰当了。如果说无上帝论也，其实我这个概念里头有那个古代中国的那个上帝有可能存在因为问题是说造物者那个问题，并不是说有一个暂时众神之中的一个最大的或者最主要的什么的，有很多不同的可能。但是其实这个主要的问题是目的的问题，目的跟意识这两个东西当做一个有因果效率的一个因素，或者所以我认为那应该怎么说？宇宙无主论，也许吧。我觉得但是其实原来这个概念是从中文翻成英文的。中文原来古代的中文有一个原来就有这个字，就是无为嘛。所以其实这个概念就是说，以无为为本，以有为为末的宇宙论。这个当然有很多种可以是以无为为本，但是西方的一个主流的思想的潮流从那个 The Fido 开始，至少在哲学上，以我看来就是以有为为主，以有为为终极，以有那个上帝造物者为终极的原理的一个宇宙论，就是以有为为至上，为最根本终极的一个诠释的原理。那如果以无为为本，其实有很多种可能，唯物论是其中一个，但是其实有很多不同的，就是以无为为本，以有为为末的思想方式。以我看来，中国的儒道释的理论层面，都是这种所谓的无神论或者以无为为本。但是这个无为，我希望我们可以有为 是不可避免的一个东西。所以其实我们 I'll give you a little bit of a sense of what a little typology that may be helpful before we start. 4 models, and now I will go into English, I'll try to maybe translate. If you have a conception of the universe like that of, well, I was starting with the Phaedo there, right? And you guys know this passage. It's a funny passage in Plato's Phaedo where Socrates says, when I was a young man, I heard someone, read out from a book of Anaxagoras. Anaxagoras being attributed by Aristotle and in this passage by Socrates according to Plato, as the first person to suggest nous, or intelligence, mind in the sense of thinking and planning and knowing, as the arche, as the first principle, as the ultimate cause of things. Socrates says, I heard this idea and I got so excited. I thought, finally, someone is giving me an explanation that really explains things. And what that would mean is that the real explanation of why things are as they are, why is the sky blue, why are the trees green, why are human beings constructed the way they are, will be because it is best that they be that way. It's very tightly related to the idea of the good. A single, unified, very importantly, single mind, because the presumption here is that conscious intelligence in human beings that we extrapolate from always does what it thinks is best. It's motivated, it's yomudi, it's teleological. And when we have a conflict of goods, it's because we have a conflict of minds. And if we have, and the way mind works as cause in human behavior is that it is always seeking the good, so says Socrates. Consciously, becoming more and more aware of the good, more and more aware of what is in its own best interest, and so on. And when this is extrapolated out to a general principle of universal creation, and there's only one mind directing, as we later find in Plato in the Timaeus, right? You have the demiurge, which designs the world. We later get this in Christianity, right? In Christian theology, the idea that the world is designed for a purpose by an intelligence. And that means that the reason the sky is blue is because it's best that it be blue. Socrates says he's disappointed that Anaxagoras doesn't really follow through. He ends up giving mechanical, non-teleological, we might say wu-wei, explanations rather than these yo-wei explanations. And what I'm saying is that there's a privileging of the yo-wei dimension of human beings then extrapolated to and expanded into a theory of the universe. This happens, one way I talk about this in the paper and also in this, but I won't go into too much. You know, there's this sort of an expansion of animism. Animism would be what? Like, 万物有灵论 or something like that, right? Animism being the belief that when something happens, it's because someone wanted it to happen, some mind, right? So when my desire is confounded in some way, when my expectation is confounded, what do I conclude? Do I conclude that this is because not my desire but someone else's desires has prevailed? Like if I trip on a rock, the rock wants me to trip, I don't want to trip, we have a conflict of interest, right? Or God wants me to trip, I don't want to trip, we have a conflict of interest. Or do I conclude that no one wanted that to happen? Is it possible for causal effects to happen in spite of the fact that no one wants them? There's a parallel question epistemologically. When I'm wrong about something, is it because someone else is right? In other words, that there's a right view other than my view. The alternative to both of those ideas is the idea that there's something non-ultimate about the idea of holding a position or of wanting something, desire and knowledge, that is teleology and consciousness. The two things that combine in the idea of nous and which are made a universal principle of in a literate culture. This is what I think does not happen in China. Of course, there is animism in China. There is even sort of maybe middle-brow theorization. I'm thinking of things that kind of get lost along the way. If you read the Xiangar commentary of the Tao Te Ching, you'll know what I mean. That's a teleological kind of theistic story. But generally speaking, I would want to claim that all the developed Chinese systems yi wu wei wei ben and yi wu wei wei zhongji, and more than that, yi wu wei wei mu biao wei mu di. If you yi wu wei wei mu biao is necessarily 吊诡的 paradoxical, right? Because 无为 is itself the lack of a conscious goal. So what we're going to have is various ways of relating yo-wei and wu-wei, but in the cases that I want to talk about in classical China, it's always with wu-wei on top, at the beginning and at the end, with some kind of instrumental and self-canceling role for yo-wei, for consciousness, for purposivity, for desire. I would say, well, so I was going to give you this little typology, and this is, I think now can make some sense of this. There's four ways you can think about the relation between the human, within this rubric, between the human and the cosmic, let's say, the pre-human, the post-human. And really, I say theism here, but I'm really talking about yo-wei and wu-wei, okay? And side note before I get to this, when we say yo-wei, wu-wei, there's a related problem that comes up. The terminology comes from Buddhism, but I think there's a version of this in early Taoism, there's a version of this in Neo-Confucianism, which is to say, yo-wei has something to do with fenbian, with making distinctions, with hard and fast distinctions of things, okay? And wu-wei ends up, because this is endemic to the notion of having a goal, to a means and ends, a 手段目的 relationship. There's a division, when you have a goal, that's necessarily a division of the desired thing from something else. That's intrinsic to the nature of desire or of telos. So another way to talk about this is to talk about the relation between fenbian, wu fenbian, or maybe in early Taoist terminology, yo xing and wu xing, in various systems of thought. That's what I want to just try to put on the table. So again, we're never going to have any system that has no fenbian or has no yo-wei. Everything has yo-wei, if it's a system at all. Right? And the challenge that's faced by various systems is how to position these things, what's ultimate, what's instrumental, right? So, that's a little bit of terminology background. Four models here. First, emulative theism. And this would be the idea that God, or the ultimate cause of things, is purposive. I'm using purposive here in English, but again, I really mean yo-wei, yo-fenbian. Okay? So the notion of theistic creator God means that the universe, the ultimate principle, what is prioritized as what is highest and most causally foundational, is yo-wei-da and is yo-fenbian. Okay? Emulative, I could use the word maybe isomorphic theism. And the idea there is that in the Socratic version, as I read it here, you have a notion that our rational consciousness that directs our behavior with a clear idea of the good is the best part of the human being, is what is ethically supreme, right? That anything that's murky or anything time I don't know exactly what I'm doing or why I'm doing it, I have a bit of a problem that I need to solve, right? The unexamined life is not worth living and so on. Nietzsche talks about this in speaking of the problem of Socrates as something new in Greek culture, this prioritization of consciousness, purpose, an idea of the good. An idea of the good is conscious purpose, as opposed to unconscious drives, or not knowing what you're doing, or being of two minds about things, okay? This is a thing that happened at a particular moment in culture, that became prioritized. And I would follow this idea that starts with a prioritization ethically, that is, the part of human behavior which is being valued is the conscious purposive part. And this is then when we get to, let's say, the Timaeus, I would say Plato trying to follow through on the Anaxagoran premise, nous as arche, mind as cause. So we should be purposive because the world is purposive, and the more we're like that, that's the better we are. Okay, the more in tune with the universe we are, the more yo-wei we are, the higher we are ethically. That's what we have in what I'm calling emulative theism. Does everyone understand what I mean? How those terms are used here? Okay. So, or isomorphic, right? This can go the other way though. Look at number 2, compensatory theism. This is a kind of notion you get in certain types of religious piety, where the idea is, well, God or the universe itself has a purpose. But that purpose is so big We don't know what it is. So we should not cling to our own personal small purposes, right? There's a 大我, and we should sort of relinquish our 小我 to follow that 大我. But the 大我 is purposive, it's 有为的. So 因为宇宙是有为的, 我们应该无为的. That's why I say compensatory. For example, in the New Testament, God's will. Thy will, not mine, be done. Will means a purpose, right? So that means I don't know what the purpose is. Let God lead me around. I relinquish purpose. The best part of the human being is the purposeless, at least in this sort of pietistic, faith-theistic way. But still, what is being given the highest value, what is really worth something, is purpose, right? Is Yowei. The universe ultimately is a Yowei, Yophembia type of a place. And in the final analysis, the purpose will become clear. There will be beautiful fembia, right? Clarity. I will see no longer through a glass darkly. Heaven and hell, good and evil, everything will be nice and separated, etc. Okay? Then there's something that's, I think, very familiar and very probably intuitive. I call it compensatory atheism. That would be the idea that, well, the universe is purposeless. The universe is wu-wei, maybe wei-wu-lun kind of an idea. Maybe it's random. Anyway, it's not directed by a mind or by an intelligence. But for that very reason, we must be purposive. So, 宇宙是无为的，所以我们应该有为. Right? We have, I would say, Shunzi is a kind of pioneer of this line of thought. Okay? 天 is 彻彻底底的无为，就因此人必须要与天地参的话，就是要有他的角色，就是要彻底的有为。It's a little more complicated than that in Shunzi. We can talk about. I would say, existentialism is this way, right? That the world is purposeless, it's meaningless. We must project our own purposes, our own meanings. Meanings are still good, right? The value is on meaning, on purpose. There's a belief that a purposive life is better than a purposeless life. Okay? Now again, that's just something someone thought of sometime at a certain point in time. We don't have to take that for granted. That's one of the things I want to bring into question here. And so we can fill out this map here and talk about emulative atheism, or I would say isomorphic atheism, which is to say the universe is purposeless, or its foundations of any Yowei, so any Yowei you find is rooted in a deeper Wu-wei. Purpose is an epiphenomenon, is an incomplete view, is not the ultimate causal account of anything. And ethically, the best aspect of humans, the ultimate goal, paradoxically, of their moral, intellectual, spiritual life is also Wu-wei. So 宇宙是无为的，人也应该无为。Okay? Emulative or isomorphic atheism. Now, as I say on the slide, more strictly, there's never no Yowei. Okay? There's never no fembia. It's a contradiction of terms. So as soon as we have this, we have paradox. And I would say paradox is what you have in every single well-developed system in classical Chinese thought, in one form or another. And again, there are myriads, there are lots of different forms this can take. Ways in which Yowei leads to or surpasses itself into Wu-wei, or is rooted in and serves as a means toward that. Okay? And what I want to claim is that whereas Shunzi I put on the side of compensatory atheism, or compensatory Wu-wei-lun, Confucius mentions Taoist Buddhists almost to a man fall into some version, different versions of this category. Okay? Should I take questions on that so far? Yeah, maybe. If you want. All right, I'll pause just for any clarification questions on the terminology. Is that clear how this is being set up? Press on, you can save the questions then. Okay. How long should I talk?
Maybe 40 minutes, 50 minutes.
And I've gone now. So in the paper, so as I said in the paper, if you've read it or if you want to look at it later, a couple things seem to follow from this. If you take away the idea of nous as arche, whether in the theistic sense, a full-grown sort of theistic, monotheist theology sense, or even in the Timaeus sense, the idea that things have one unique identity, that there is a final answer to be known about what things are, that there is a single, unambiguous, univocal essence of things, also becomes highly questionable. That is to say, if knowledge and purpose, and especially a single knowledge, a unified knowledge and a unified purpose, do not have a causal role in making things what they are, it is hard to see why we would assume that there could be a final knowledge, that in principle, this is sort of about the in principle intelligibility of the world, whether a single subordinate system of facts is possible. Another way to put this, and this is in the paper in the discussion of Taoism and the Tao Te Ching, in a certain sense, I want to claim that this idea of Tao, as it's developed in the Tao Te Ching, is the perfect antithesis to God, the most extreme antithesis, okay? Even more so than an idea like matter or atoms in the void or something, because what's implied in the idea of Tao in the Tao Te Ching is the in principle, non-totalizableness of any possible knowledge. That is to say that even to an omniscient observer, the Tao cannot be fully known. It is not unknowable. It is not itself determinate. Okay? Part of what we say when we talk about Wuxing and Wu and Yo and Yoxing has to do with knowledge, or the possibility of knowledge, or whether something can be fully, unambiguously known. Those are assumptions, right? That what a thing is something that ultimately could be known. And I am claiming, I have a nice little quote here from Heidegger, makes a similar point, that something in this idea of adequation of knowledge, or correspondence between our knowledge and an essence, is rooted in the idea of the ideas in the mind of God, the privileged observer. Not only the privileged observer, but in the case of a theistic God, or even the Anaxagorean nous, I would say, the manufacturer with the instructions who says what the thing is supposed to be. It's one thing, and someone has the authority to say what it is because he made it. Okay? A mind that made it. In the absence of a mind that made it, maybe you could make a case for single order knowledge. Maybe Aristotle is trying to do that post a creationist's story a la Timaeus, which he rejects. But I would say it's very difficult and non-obvious to do that. And what we would have phenomenologically pre-theorizing experience would always be ambiguity of identity, which would not necessarily be felt as in any way a problem, as conflictual, as long as we are not assuming a God's eye view, as long as we are living in an 以无为为本的宇宙. Okay? So 以无为为本的宇宙 is going to have a different role, it's going to conceptualize what a fact is differently. Not a fully closed off, once and for all, subordinate, completely determinate fact, but a fact which comes with its own openness to its, shall we say, its contradictions, or its transformations, or its connection to what it is not. It's sort of kind of tip of the iceberg picture of intelligibility, where an object is always sort of half underwater, half unseen, half unformed, not even half. As an ontological condition of things, of course, this is going to change the nature of knowledge. It's going to change the nature of ethics, of activity, of desire. And I'll give you what I consider sort of the key passage, a great passage, I think, from Guoxian on the Yo Wei Wu Wei question. So there you go. Omniscience is a contradiction in terms, Taoism. Fully determinate order, including moral order, is a contradiction in terms. Meaning of life is a contradiction in terms. Nature following rules is a contradiction in terms. Purpose of the universe, sense-making of any kind, can only be a partial epiphenomenon, and that's good news. Right? That's why it's emulative atheism. I just want to look at this lovely passage from Guoxian. Because, as I said, no system eliminates your way or your fenbia or zhi from itself entirely. They cannot. What's being asserted instead is that what is more fundamental and what is, say, ethically or spiritually highest is wu wei and wu zhi. So this is fu wei wei zhe bu neng wei, er wei zi wei er. Wei zhi zhe bu neng zhi, er zhi zi zhi er. So those who do doing cannot do, right? It cannot be done. Doing self does. So wei is the opposite of wu wei, right? But even wei is ultimately wu wei, which is to say, we do not. You will have an infinite regress if you have deliberateness all the way down in Guo Shang's view. He's a pivotal atheist thinker in my view. Wei zhi zhi bu neng zhi, er zhi zi zhi ye. We don't know how to know. Right? We just know. And if we did know how to know, you wouldn't know how we know how to know. Somewhere along the line, we need to have, in Guo Shang's view, a source in spontaneity, right? Zi zhi er bu zhi ye. By that he means what spontaneously knows is not the doing of the deliberate, determinate thing called knowing. It's rooted in and ultimately reducible to non-knowing. Bu zhi ye zi zhi chu yu bu zhi. Okay? Knowledge arises from non-knowledge. Non-knowing. Guo Shang always means by zhi teleological knowledge. Determinate knowledge is always sort of saturated with purpose, which is what he is fighting against. Zi wei er bu wei ya. Bu wei is a wei, chu yu bu wei. So doing comes out of not doing. Right? Wei chu yu bu wei, gu yi bu wei wei zhu. There it is. Okay? That's sort of the topic of my talk today. Zhi chu yu bu zhi, gu yi bu zhi wei zhou. Alright? I consider Guo Shang kind of a very pivotal thinker for everything that happens in Chinese thought after him, which is after the 4th century, right? So everything in Chinese Buddhism, in the book, I have a story, but there are possibly many other possible ways to construe it. But Huayan in one way draws certain things, Tiantai in another way. Those get mixed all together in Chan in a certain way, and into different Neo-Confucian schools. But this is a crucial moment when most explicitly this wu wei as foundation.
Sorry, just one question. Where does this come up?
This passage?
Yeah.
This is in Commentary chapter 6. And I can give you, I think I have the citation.
Which story? Do you remember the story?
I believe it's the opening passage. I could be wrong about this, but I think it's the opening passage where it says, 知天之所为，知人之所为，知矣, right? And then it goes, 天之所为者，天而生也, right? And then 人之所为也者，以知之所知，养其知之，所不知所为，知之不知. That, I believe it's right. So, which in English is beginning of chapter 6 of Zhuangzi. It says to know what heaven does, to know what man does is the ultimate. What heaven does is, by being heaven, it produces, a long translation, how to translate that, 天而生矣. Okay? But then what man does, what man's knowledge is to use what his knowledge knows to nourish yang, what his knowledge does not know. So I think this is a commentary on the true existence. So this is kind of the ne plus ultra of the point in its most explicit terms, but and it plays out in different ways in the Buddhist commentary. Let me back up a step and talk about the word religion. Because part of what I want to do here is I'm using a very contentious, deliberately kind of polemical sense of the word religiousness. And if you have the paper, I feel this is very shaky and I would appreciate your input. But I'm trying to think about, of course it's a very difficult problem to define religion. And I'm not even trying to do that, I'm just trying to define something I call a religious dimension, which could be in art or in poetry or in philosophy or in science for that matter, or even in ethics. And of course, I want to include that in a way that will put a wedge between the association between religion and God. Okay? So a theistic system is one particular kind of religion, and I want to consider that a subset of something else because I consider all these systems we're talking about to have this religious dimension, And actually, the point if I ever write the book this is supposed to be a part of, sort of the main point of this is not just that they're atheists, it's that the atheism is what's religious about it. Okay? It's not just, in spite of their atheism, there's also that they managed to have some other religion. That might be sort of compensatory atheism type of thing in some way. On the contrary, it's the seeing, the realization, the actualization of purposelessness, of godlessness, of 无为为主, if you like. That is the religious experience. And I want to try to accentuate the way in which that is at once an extreme antithesis to any form of theistic or even post-theistic way of thinking about this experience. Now, how can we get a category broad enough to cover those two? In other words, atheist religious experience. Not just religious experience without God, but the religious experience of the absence of God. Right? The religious experience, the realization of a godless cosmos as a kind of ecstatic epiphany, if you like. And that's what I see, something like this going on. It's a almost soteriological move here in Guoxiang. Okay, it is the highest knowledge to know the unknowability and so on. We can talk about things like negative theology and attempts like that in Western theology to get somewhere near here. I think they fail, but we can talk about them too. Anyway, as a first attempt to talk about what could be a sense of religiousness that would apply to these very disparate cases, let me get you I will read this from the paper.
我能问一个小问题？
好的，
对 clarify 这个为在这里
Yeah.
跟你的英文English there.
Yes.
You use purpose.
Yes.
Pursuing.
For way. Yes.
And sometimes you also use doing.
Yes.
And maybe I prefer acting that way.
Sure.
So
I can do that.
Purposive and acting or doing. You seem to take it to be the same, right?
Yes, I do. I think action, I take it in the sense in which a deed is distinguished from an event. So a little bit of stuff in Kant on this, right? So that means a deed is something that is done with a final cause, not just an efficient cause, right? So I would take the word action in the full sense to mean purposive action.
So 无为 is just like 不为 means 不做或者是没有目的。For you, mean the same.
Yes. So things happen, right? And I mean, events take place. But the cause of their taking place is not that they have a purpose, right? But here we actually have a two-level thing, right? You can have a purpose. You can never escape away in Guoxiang's view here, right? Even when you're...
So you also have two labels here?
Well, all sorts of different... Yes.
So
A lot of two levels. So I think if we look at different systems of thought, each of them has, as I said before, there's always some way level. And the question is going to be, I'll give you a handful very quickly. I mean, if you think about two truths in Buddhism, for example, RD, right? There's Shi Su Di and DED, right? Right? You have your way as a means toward Wu Wei. You might say, 孔子70岁，多多少少有那个意思啊，有为达到一个无为啊，随心所欲而不逾矩 etc. Right? That's Wu Wei at that point, I'd say. Okay.
One more last point.
Yeah.
知, do you think 知 is part of 为 or they are two different concepts?
They are two, for Guoxiang, I think they're two intrinsically linked. You never have one without the other, but they're two distinct aspects.
So they are linked, but they are not the same.
You could call them two sides of one thing, because I don't think for him they ever appear individually. I think wherever there's Zhi, there's Wei, and wherever there's Wei, there's Zhi. But he's pointing to two different sides, right? That's what I think. Okay, well, maybe we don't have to spend too much time on the definition of religion, but I actually, this is where I'm quite sure I need to refine this, so I'm just curious about how it strikes you guys. So I want to read you a little bit about that in English, if I could. So this is page 9 in my version of this. I say my use of the word religiousness as opposed to, I could have used a word like spirituality, I could have used a word like poetic resonance, mysticism, epiphany, ecstasy. I could have even used a more negative sounding word like paranoia. is somewhat polemical intent. I mean to point with this word to a particular aspect of experience, one that may also be present in types of experience not usually called religious. And here's where I attempt a definition. We may describe it as the transcendence of any finitude. So 超越任何一个有限性. By which I mean simply the suspension and supersession of the single finite identity granted to things within a given limited context. This is a way of trying to say, okay, if we posit a beginning of the universe or God, that's one way of taking a given identity conceived as finite and adding a second story to it. And when we add a second context and a second story, a second narrative, or a second conceptual scheme around something, we at the same time go beyond the initial finite determinate identity given to that thing. So I think I'm just being friendly. It turns out in God's eye I'm doing some great deed or some terrible deed, right? There's a second meaning added to things. So it presupposes a prior finite meaning, and there's tons of different ways this can happen. And I'm suggesting that whether that happens through, a philosophical insight or a poem or a religious narrative or even a political narrative, whenever that happens, I'd like to identify that as the core idea of religiousness. Now, these things land in a second determination, right, where you get another determinate meaning replaces the first determinate meaning. This is what I think happens when you have religions with the idea of creator God, a monotheistic religion. It's kind of an attempt at a religion that backfires, that undermines the true religiousness of it, in my view, and if I want to be polemical about this, okay? So God is a failed attempt at religion, okay? Is a way in which religion backfires, okay? It was a good idea at the time, and it got tangled up. So if we can identify the initial impulse there, right, that way, and of course this is, I don't know, please take a look at that and maybe come at me with objections to that, because I'd like to refine that one. One important thing about that is to transcend any given finitude. There's several ways that can happen. One is replacing a single finite meaning or identity or essence of a thing with a single infinite one. That's where what happens with the God's eye view, okay? Because it's still determinate. Whoa. Because God has a judgment. God knows what things are and makes a determination about them. But it can also be a transcendent to what we would call infinite meanings. And I would say the same thing about Yowei and Wu-wei, right? What we're talking about here, not one finite meaning, but an infinite series of alternate meanings. Okay? Either of those would satisfy the condition of transcending a single finite identity, okay, or determination. And I would say those, the same thing goes for personality, right? That's why I say what I'm calling atheism or godlessness here not only can, but tends to be polytheistic. Tends to involve many gods, many personalities, right? Where the distinction is not between a personality-less cosmos, which would be a Yowei-less cosmos, but the question of whether there's one or an infinite number of them that emerge from Wu-wei. So the emergence of infinite personalities, the emergence, I would even want to say, not the denial of purpose, but on some versions of this, the grounding of infinite purposes, plural. This singular plural distinction is very, very key here, right? This is what really everything hangs on, right? So one way of combining the sort of zero point and the infinite point is to say instead of one purpose for the universe, when we have zero purpose, we also have infinite purposes. Those go together. Those elide into each other. Okay, very quickly, I'm going to, should I try to wrap up? All I want to say, okay, so very quickly, we can go into this. I was going to talk about Confucianism and about Chinese Buddhism, and so 3 points. And I also want to say something about what I'm calling the last couple pages of the paper. Maybe you can just read it on your own. What I call an impoverished view of unity that comes with monotheism, in my view. That is to say, a type of unity which is cumulative and teleological in nature, and with that a type of, you might say, seriousness that excludes certain other types, which I sort of touch on very inadequately in the last paragraph, of unity. Unity as a totality of transformations, for example, or openness to other determinations. And I could maybe I'll read that. What I was going to say about Confucianism, very complex case, of course. But I want to talk about the Lunyu and the Mengzi sort of as exemplars of the category I'm talking about. In my view, something changes with Xunzi, but we get back to a more complex view in the mature metaphysics of the pre-Qin period, for example, the Zhongyong and in the Zhizuan. Okay, in the Zhizuan, the passage I talk about, I talk about sort of Tiandi Buren and Shengren Buren in Tao Te Ching 5, right? There's a perfect example of emulative atheism, right? Tiandi Buren, Shengren Buren, okay? In the Zhizuan, we have a rather different configuring of that in the Qi Yi Yin Yang Zhu Wei Dao passage, right? And there you have Ji Zhi Zhe Shan Ye, right? Cheng Zhi Zhe Xin Ye. That means Shan is given a weirdly privileged place, but it is not actually part of what Yin and Yang are, as I read that passage. Many disputes about this in Zhuxi and some of Confucianism, but Ji Zhi Zhe Shan does an interesting thing which is followed up in the rest of the passage, I would argue, in Ren Zhi Jian Zhi Wei Zhi Ren, right? Zhi Zhi Jian Zhi Wei Zhi Zhi. So it is not itself Ren, it is not itself Zhi, benevolent knowledge. Those are two terms, right? Telos and knowledge, right? Back again. That passage gives us a very subtle, carefully constructed, new configuration of the Youwei in the Wu-wei. It says, Yi Yin Yi Yang Zhu Wei Dao is not Ren, is not Zhi, but it can be seen as Ren, and it can be seen as Zhi, and it is actually a virtue to see it as Ren and as Zhi. That means you are Ren and you are Zhi, and those are very much affirmed by the text. Which then goes on to say, Xian Zhu Ren, Sang Zhu Yong, right? Bai Xing Er Yong Er Bu Zhi, right? So, everyone knows that passage, right? So that's basically saying, it is revealed in Ren, in goodness, and it is concealed in all other functions, in all functions. We have an explicit, implicit distinction there, right? Which is not to say that it is more itself more Ren, but just more manifest in Ren. And then the same passage ends up by saying, it, right? Does not worry along with the sage. The sage must be Youwei, right? But Tiandi are not. We can talk about Kongzi and Tianhe Yanzai, okay? An emulative atheism in Kongzi. Kongzi wants to be like Tian. In what way? Tian Wu does not speak. That means heaven does not give orders. Okay, this of course very complex, and I have a more. We can talk about the Kongzi case maybe in Q&A, but this is where this is going. Also, the weird, sort of personal, sort of impersonal nature of heaven in the Analects, also in Mencius. I'd like to suggest that we can approach that from this angle as well. Last word on this. I want to talk about Buddhism for a second. It's immensely complex, but just one little point to be made here. There are, of course, a lot of the Chinese Buddhist systems, I'd say the mainstream Chinese system, do posit a universal mind, right? There's Wei Xin, Zhu Fa Wei Xin, right? But that Wei Xin, just like the Tao, is an extreme antithesis to the notion of God, not an approximation of the mind of God. Why do I say so? Because in all Buddhist systems, purpose is a function of desire. Desire is a function of a certain type of activity of mind called nian, right? In Chinese Buddhism, generally speaking, which is not only not the highest good, is the lowest bad. Okay? Insofar as the mind has a specific goal, is Youwei, it is deluded. And so a distinction is made between mind as awareness, as a totality function, which has no determinate goal or desire, but which grounds the arising of nian, right? And you write those specific names themselves. That's why the 起心论, for example, will say 心性理念 or 心体理念, right? The essence of mind is free of 念. Okay? And teleology, knowledge in the nous, Greek nous sense, that's 念. Now we have a lot of different stories here in Chinese Buddhism. I'd be happy to go into them like school by school if you like. Talk a little bit about sort of northern school Chan, southern school Chan. Leng Yan Jing has a way of dealing with this. Tiantai is a whole different ball of wax. And I would like nothing better than to talk about that. But maybe I'll stop there and just open this up for questions about it.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Brook. Many balls of wax. Yeah. This is a fascinating topic, and perhaps it's really disturbing feeling that we don't have enough time to talk about this, about all these issues. But yeah, we have 1 hour, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A. And then we have one respondent first, like Professor Lin Zhao from the National Taiwan University, because I asked you to give a brief response. Maybe you can just respond, and then maybe collect more questions, and later on you can.
Professor Brook, this issue is interesting and the evidence so much. Thank you very much. I have 3 questions. I think about but maybe I speak in Chinese to about that. 我想第一个问题，我想了解是你要去比。就是说你要去凸显the difference between the big art tradition and the godless religious institution in Chinese philosophy. Yeah, so you prefer just focus on these 2 contexts. But我仍然想到一个问题是那个在中国的，就是你提到的像孔子那个天 yeah. So you expand the 10 to the space, just like space. The space including some properties, just like real or evaluation. Some. 但是在《论语》里头，我们好像你也注意到，好像还是有一个 godlike。
是。
Yeah. 那换一个方式，如果我们回到 most.
Yes.
Yeah, you said about the real. 是。天志。And the peoples, including the ruler. Should follow the will from the heaven. So, 所以你的论证里面，除了选择儒家、道家，那我想问一个问题说，对于中国传统里面，including the godlike thought, just like Moist, or Han Dynasty philosopher, just like 董仲舒
Yes.
那跟像这种思想跟西方的。的差别在哪里？我觉得，那它是不是可以放进你要谈的 godless religiousness？
Can I answer that one?
Okay. Maybe wait.
No. Otherwise we forget everything.
Okay.
This is a great question. So, 对墨家那个天志那个概念，我觉得那应该是最真的好像有意图要有这种。支配一切的那种天但是是不是造物者是很模糊了？好像有1、2个地方在墨子会说天怎么安排万物如何，但是很淡just a little very faint. So 并没有一个，所以我觉得主要的是创造，从一个概念而创造。如果是事后去安排，那是另外一回事。那这个案子，这个方案就比较特别，但是我觉得墨家那种思想，是也可以说是例外的而且是早衰了，早死了，被取代了没有成功了。但是我觉得基本上那个冲动，那个一样的那种，像柏拉图提的那种，苏格拉底的那种。那种解决的方法好像有想到，但是没有彻底去发展出来。而且也许你可以说这个是 very speculative， 也许文化的一些前提 阻碍他的发展。他想要往那个方向走，但是走了几步就好像不能再走啊，然后就从另外那些地方就是I mean, you could say that's historical accident, or you could say, I don't know which is true. Same with Dong Zhongshu, I think. 我觉得 Dong Zhongshu wants to be a theist. That's what he's trying to accomplish. But in my view, I wrote about this a little bit in the book, he's undermined by his own vocabulary. And he can't really, you need something like the Platonic system to make monotheism work, maybe. And it just doesn't work. He's trying to do it with a yin-yang system, and it keeps flipping over on him. So it's there's a tension there in Dong Zhongshu, in my view. In terms of the analytes, I'd say Mencius as well. 那个天，我觉得的确一定就是有一个人格的层面，绝对有，也有一个非人格的那一层面。所以这个有很多诠释学的问题在里头。你要怎么，哪一个是终极，哪一个是口头上的，哪一个是用当时常用的一个说法，或者是当真的，或者怎么样，当真到什么程度 ？It's very difficult to say. As you noted in here and also in the book, 我觉得一个可能性就是，因为中文没有单数、复数啊，也没有那个过去式、现在式，很多这个very easy to what counts as a sort of mass noun or a name or a place, right? There's no capitalization, there's no way to know that. So Tian, of course, originally is a place, and in the paper I say, I said a synecdoche is actually wrong. I should say a metonym is what it is. A metonym like Hollywood. Right? So, as you read, so, I mean, I'm not sure about that. I think that's kind of an elegant solution, and it fits in with what we know about classical conceptions of the spirit world, right? Which is to say, it's a combination of personal and impersonal. Collectively, it has certain tendencies or desires, but it's not a single being. Just like Hollywood is not a single being. But Hollywood wants action movies, and heaven wants benevolence. Okay? But there's no guy named Hollywood. And in fact, there are people in Hollywood who don't want action movies, right? And there are things in Hollywood which are not people. They're just institutions and money and buildings. So I think it's that's my favorite theory about how heaven works in the analytes. It's kind of filtering down. And then when we get to the Tian He Yanzai stuff, I think we've come into a distinctive move, starting to get into this Wu Wei version of heaven, emulant in Confucius. But it's not all the way there yet.
这是我发的话一下，
我先请你
这想发的话跟他的回答就这个问题。在回答那个时候，想到那个 God， 好像你又有区别，它是不是有一个创造性，或是然后另外还是有为无为，或是你讲的那个 purposive 那个问题，我觉得这里还有比较细致的区别，但是你讲的有为好像是比较，同时又可以涵盖 purposive。又涵盖那个创造的意思，是不是？
That's right. 因为我所谓的创造一定是 purpose。如果就发生就不是创造，它就是生。
对，但是 purposive 不见得是创造。
Right.
对不对
That's right. Exactly.
对，所以在中文里边，在中国哲学里边，也许比较没有那个创造的意思，但是其实有蛮多 purposive 的那个意思。
Well, right. You can have so I said 就像 Hollywood。它有一个 purpose， 你可以这么说。我觉得孔子那边绝对觉得天有一个偏向，对不对？它是有肯定某一方面的比较可以联系到天理、天命吧。但是这个不一定表示它是创造，就对这么说，也不一定表示它是人格化的，彻底人格化。应该说百物生焉那句，right？天和焉哉，百物生焉，四时行焉，百物生焉。所以天绝对有这个行跟生这两个功能，对不对？那但是 ，so this is where the 过去式、现在式 becomes important, right? 四世行焉, it's clearly present progressive, right? Not 百无生焉 once, right? Not that kind of greater, but continual. 生 is in from 造, right? So I agree with you. I mean, there's a productive function for heaven, and in Kongzi's view, I think it includes a normative dimension. But I think since it has the impersonal dimension as well, we can't understand that as like God command. In fact, Confucius explicitly rejects the idea of a command of God.